The little girl didn't know how long she'd been traveling. Time wasn't really a thing anymore, not when the watch decided everything for her. She just kept landing in different centuries, meeting different children who were royal by accident of birth and doomed by it too. When she blinked awake again, she was in Russia, which meant cold, always cold. Even indoors, the air bit at her nose like an impatient cat. Before her sat another boy, pale as paper, his limbs thin and awkward. This was Tsarevich Alexei Romanov, son of Nicholas II and Alexandra. Yes, the last Tsar, the one who thought ruling a crumbling empire during World War I and Revolution was a good idea. Spoiler, it was not. Alexei should have been the heir to centuries of Romanov rule. Instead, he was a sick boy with hemophilia. Every bump, every bruise, every stumble could turn into days of agony. His parents hovered constantly. His mother, Alexandra, prayed obsessively. His father, Nicholas, mostly ignored political collapse while worrying about his fragile son. And then there was Rasputin. That's right, the creepy bearded mystic who looked like he'd lost a fight with a hairbrush. Rasputin became Alexei's unofficial doctor/savior. Whenever Alexei suffered a bleeding episode, Rasputin would sit by his bed, mumbling prayers, and somehow the boy calmed. Was it hypnosis? A placebo? Or just that Rasputin told everyone to stop giving Alexei medicines, like aspirin, which only made bleeding worse. Either way, it made Rasputin a household staple. Our little traveler sat near Alexei's bed as he groaned quietly, clutching his leg. She didn't say anything. She never did. But Alexei seemed almost comforted. Maybe because for once, someone was there who wasn't panicking or praying loudly. She didn't stay long. The watch tugged her away before the story reached its well-known tragic ending in a basement in Yekaterinburg. Some things, even a magical watch, didn't want her to see. When she landed again, she was still in Russia, but earlier this time. A smoky wooden palace, the sound of boots stomping, angry men arguing in low, tense voices. Here was another child, this one standing in the corner, wide-eyed, while his father shouted orders. This was Ivan Ivanovich, son of Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible. Because, of course, he was. Ivan the Terrible wasn't exactly Father of the Year. He was paranoid, violent, and had a temper like a thunderstorm in a teapot. Unfortunately, that temper eventually boiled over onto his own son. Ivan Ivanovich was intelligent, capable, and probably a better candidate for Tsar than his father. But one day in 1581, during one of Ivan the Terrible's legendary rages, he struck his son on the head with his scepter. Not exactly a tender gesture. The blow was fatal. Our little traveler saw the aftermath. Ivan the Terrible kneeling by his son's body, clutching him and weeping. A grotesque picture of regret. For once, the terrifying ruler looked small, like a broken old man. The girl didn't linger. The watch, perhaps mercifully, pulled her out of the scene before the silence turned too heavy. Next stop, Austria, which meant lace collars, stiff etiquette, and the faint smell of strudel somewhere in the background. She found herself watching the children of Emperor Franz Joseph and Empress Elizabeth, as in Sisi, the restless beauty who hated court life almost as much as she hated her husband. Sisi's children didn't exactly win the lottery of parenting. Her first daughter, Sophie, died in infancy of illness while traveling with her. Her surviving daughter, Gisela, was raised more by governesses than her mother. And her only son, Crown Prince Rudolf, well, he's a story on his own. Our little traveler found Rudolf as a boy. He was sensitive, bright, but caught in a tug-of-war between his stern father and his absent, melancholic mother. Franz Josef insisted on a harsh military upbringing. CC wanted something gentler, but usually escaped court life instead of fighting for it. Rudolf grew up lonely, pressured, and restless, and eventually, in adulthood, he ended up in the Mayerling incident, a so-called suicide pact with his mistress that became one of the great scandals of 19th century Europe. The little girl didn't see that part. She only watched him sitting alone in a vast nursery, staring out the window, already carrying the shadow of a future that would never be bright. The watch hummed. Time to move on. Now she was in Spain again, another Habsburg, because apparently the watch had a dark sense of humor. This time, the boy was Don Carlos, son of Philip II. Don Carlos was, well, complicated. Descriptions of him vary. Some said he was violently unstable. Others claimed he was simply another poor child crushed under the weight of Habsburg genetics and cruel parenting. What we know, he was sickly from the start, deformed skull, hunched body, frequent fevers. His tutors called him cruel, though that might just mean he enjoyed tormenting animals, which was unfortunately not unusual in royal courts. He was betrothed, unbetrothed, schemed about, locked up, and eventually declared unfit for rule. Our little traveler peeked into his chamber, where he paced like a trapped animal. Servants whispered nervously, always watching him. He seemed more like a prisoner than a prince, which, in a sense, he was. Don Carlos died at 23, locked away by his own father, and Spain pretended not to notice. The girl touched the cracked face of her watch. Even she felt heavy after that one. When she blinked again, she was in France, a lavish palace, too much perfume, too many chandeliers, and an overwhelming sense of, look how rich we are. Here she met the children of Louis XIV, the Sun King, which sounds impressive until you realize Louis XIV had more illegitimate kids than legitimate ones, and most of his heirs didn't survive long enough to enjoy being royal anyway. The Dauphin, Louis's eldest son, was overshadowed his entire life. He was constantly compared to his father, who micromanaged everything down to how people buttered their bread. By the time the Dauphin had children of his own, grandsons like Louis XV, he was already tired and sidelined. Our little traveler watched the little grandsons running in stiff silk outfits, their lives already mapped out like chess pieces. They laughed, but it was the brittle laughter of children who knew too well they were being observed. Louis XIV outlived most of them, leaving the throne to a fragile great-grandson who was too young to care about ruling. The cycle continued, endlessly, and the watch ticked on. By now, the little traveler was beginning to sense the pattern more deeply. Childhood wasn't really childhood in these palaces. It was waiting rooms for crowns, heavy with expectation, short on joy. Playrooms looked more like miniature throne rooms. Toys were less about fun and more about teaching future rulers how to pretend they liked ceremony. She thought, just for a moment, about her own small bedroom back home. Posters on the wall, a shelf of stuffed animals, a bed that creaked when she bounced on it. And for the first time, she missed it. But the watch didn't care about homesickness. It pulsed again. This time, she landed in Portugal. She found herself staring at Afonso VI, a boy who became king as a teenager. Alfonso had suffered an illness in childhood, probably meningitis, that left him partially paralyzed and mentally unstable. His reign was a disaster. Ministers controlled him. His marriage collapsed when his wife demanded annulment on grounds of impotence, which was, let's say, not the kind of gossip any teenager wants immortalized in history books. The little traveler saw him as a boy, before the humiliations. He sat slumped in a chair, legs trembling, trying to keep up with lessons he could barely focus on. The tutors sighed, the servants whispered, the crown hovered in the background, waiting like a vulture. Afonso ended up deposed by his own brother, and Portugal quietly moved on, like they often did. The girl touched her watch again. She was learning that in royal families, brothers weren't always just brothers. They were backup plans. And with that, the watch tugged once more. Where to next?